April 1945. Allied forces pushed deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. What they discover behind barbed wire fences will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Battle-hardened men who had seen the horrors of war across Europe found themselves unprepared. Some wept openly. Others fell silent, unable to process what stood before them. But among the evidence of mass murder, among the testimonies of survivors barely clinging to life, the liberators found something that would come to symbolize the cold, calculated nature of Nazi evil in ways that still disturb historians 8 decades later. Warehouses, organized, labeled, filled with human hair. To understand how human beings could be reduced to raw materials, we must first understand the ideology that made such horrors possible. The Nazi Party rose to power in Germany in 1933, led by Adolf Hitler. Their worldview was built on a foundation of racial hierarchy, extreme nationalism, and the dehumanization of those they deemed inferior. Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, political opponents, and many others were systematically stripped of their rights, their property, their dignity, and ultimately their lives. But this descent into darkness did not happen overnight. It began with words, with laws, with a gradual normalization of hatred. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 stripped German Jews of citizenship. Kristallnacht in 1938 saw Jewish businesses and synagogues destroyed across Germany and Austria. Each step prepared society for what would come next. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, triggering the Second World War, the Nazi regime began implementing what they would eventually call the final solution: the systematic murder of Europe's Jewish population. Concentration camps that had originally held political prisoners expanded. New camps were built, designed specifically for mass murder. Names that would become synonymous with human cruelty entered history: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek. By 1942, the machinery of death operated at industrial scale. And that word, industrial, is not metaphorical. The Nazi death camps functioned with the efficiency of factories. Every aspect was calculated, every process optimized, including what happened to the bodies of the murdered. Germany in 1942 faced a fundamental problem. The war that was supposed to bring quick victory had become a grinding conflict on multiple fronts. Resources were stretched thin. The Allied blockade limited imports. Every material, every commodity became precious. On the Eastern Front, German soldiers faced the brutal Russian winter. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Men froze to death in their foxholes. The Wehrmacht desperately needed warm clothing, insulation, any material that could protect their troops from the cold. In the Atlantic, German U-boats waged a campaign against Allied shipping. These submarines required specialized materials for insulation and soundproofing, materials that were increasingly difficult to obtain. Into this context of scarcity, the Nazi bureaucracy made a decision that reveals the true depth of their moral corruption. The concentration camps would not simply be sites of murder. They would be centers of production, and the victims themselves would become the raw material. The SS Economics and Administrative Main Office, known by its German initials WVC, oversaw this grotesque enterprise. Under the leadership of Oswald Pohl, the department issued detailed instructions to camp commandants about the collection and processing of victim belongings. Nothing was to be wasted. Clothing was sorted and redistributed to ethnic Germans resettling in conquered territories. Gold fillings were extracted and melted down. Eyeglasses were collected, prosthetic limbs gathered, and hair, cut from the heads of victims, was processed for industrial use. This was not the work of a few disturbed individuals acting outside official channels. This was policy, documented in memoranda, tracked in ledgers, discussed in meetings. The bureaucracy of murder included detailed accounting of human remains. We know this because the Nazis kept records, meticulous records. When Allied forces liberated the camps and later prosecuted Nazi leaders at Nuremberg, they found warehouses full of documentation. The perpetrators had cataloged their own crimes. The collection of hair followed a systematic process, as coldly efficient as any factory production line. When transports arrived at the camps, victims went through a selection process. Those deemed able to work were sent to labor details. The elderly, the young, the sick, and many others were sent directly to their deaths. Before entering the gas chambers, victims were told to undress. They were told they would be showering. They were told they would receive their belongings back. These were lies designed to prevent panic, to maintain order, to make the killing process more efficient. We will not describe what happened next in graphic detail. The horror speaks for itself. What matters for understanding this particular aspect of Nazi cruelty is what came after. In some camps, hair was cut before victims entered the gas chambers. In others, it was removed afterward. Special prisoner work details, known as Sonderkommando, were forced to perform these tasks under threat of their own deaths. The collected hair was then processed, washed, disinfected to prevent the spread of disease, dried, and then compressed into massive bundles the Nazis referred to as bales. These bales could weigh hundreds of pounds each, packed tight, wrapped, labeled, ready for shipment. At Auschwitz alone, the Soviet liberators found nearly 2 tons of human hair in warehouses, awaiting transport. This represented only what the Nazis had not yet shipped out. The bales were transported by rail to German manufacturing firms. There, they were processed alongside legitimate raw materials like wool, cotton, and animal hair. Workers in these factories may or may not have known the origin of what they worked with. The system was designed to obscure, to normalize, to make the unthinkable routine. Historian Nikolaus Watchman, in his comprehensive study of the concentration camp system, documented how this process reflected the broader Nazi approach to their victims. Every aspect of a person could be exploited: labor while alive, possessions upon arrival, body after death. What became of this hair? What did the Nazi war machine produce from the physical remains of murdered men, women, and children? The primary product was industrial felt. Felt is a textile made by compressing and matting fibers together. Unlike woven fabrics, felt does not require spinning thread. It can be made from wool, animal fur, or, as the Nazis discovered, human hair. The resulting material is dense, durable, and remarkably effective as insulation. This felt was used to manufacture items for the German military: socks and boot linings for soldiers, mittens and gloves, helmet liners, items to protect German troops from the cold they faced on the Eastern Front. There is a terrible irony here. German soldiers freezing in Russia, fighting a war of aggression and genocide, were kept warm by materials derived from the bodies of Holocaust victims. The men wearing those socks almost certainly did not know. The crime had been laundered, literally and figuratively, into ordinary objects. Human hair, felt, also found its way into German submarines. U-boats required extensive insulation, both for temperature control and for soundproofing. Hair-based felt provided effective insulation at a time when other materials were scarce. Beyond military applications, the hair was used for mattress stuffing and padding. Some of this material ended up in civilian products. German citizens may have slept on mattresses containing the remains of murdered people without ever knowing. German companies that received these shipments left records, purchase orders, receipts, quality assessments. The banality of these documents stands in stark contrast to their horrifying content. Businessmen discussing hair quality and delivery schedules, treating human remains as any other commodity. After the war, many of these companies faced scrutiny. Some executives were prosecuted. Others escaped accountability entirely. The question of corporate complicity in Nazi crimes remains a subject of historical and legal debate to this day. When Soviet forces liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau on January 27, 1945, they immediately understood the importance of documenting what they found. Camera crews recorded the camp. Investigators cataloged evidence. Survivors were interviewed, and the warehouses were examined in detail. What they found in the storage buildings, known collectively as Canada due to the perceived wealth of possessions inside, shocked even soldiers who had seen years of combat. Hundreds of thousands of items of clothing, mountains of shoes, suitcases still bearing the names and addresses of their owners, eyeglasses, prosthetic limbs, prayer shawls, and hair. Nearly 7,000 pounds of human hair packed and ready for shipment. The Soviets conducted chemical analysis on some of this hair. They found traces of Zyklon B, the poison gas used in the murder process. This forensic evidence would later be presented at the Nuremberg trials. At Nuremberg, the exploitation of victim bodies became part of the case against Nazi leadership. Prosecutors presented documents, testimony, and physical evidence. The bales of hair, the invoices from German companies, the systematic nature of the enterprise, all contributed to establishing the industrial scale of Nazi crimes. Defense attorneys attempted various strategies. Some claimed ignorance. Others pointed to following orders. None could adequately explain away the documented evidence of systematic exploitation that reduced human beings to raw materials. Today, some of this hair remains on display at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum. Behind glass, in a climate-controlled environment, visitors can see what remains of that evidence. The hair has faded over the decades, turned gray by time and exposure. But its presence serves as undeniable physical evidence of what occurred, a silent testimony that no revisionist can explain away. Many visitors find this exhibit the most difficult part of their museum experience. More than statistics, more than photographs, more than documents, this physical reminder of individual human beings makes the abstract concrete. Historians and philosophers have grappled with what the Nazi exploitation of victim bodies represents. Their conclusions offer important insights for understanding not just the Holocaust, but the nature of dehumanization itself. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, herself a German Jew who escaped Nazi persecution, wrote extensively about what she called the banality of evil. Her analysis suggests that great crimes are often committed not by monsters, but by ordinary people who have stopped seeing their victims as human. The collection and processing of human hair exemplifies this principle. The camp administrators who organized the process, the workers who sorted and packed the hair, the businessmen who purchased it, the factory workers who processed it, at each step, individuals participated in an atrocity by treating it as routine work. The collection and processing of human hair exemplifies this principle. The camp administrators who organized the process, the workers who sorted and packed the hair, the businessmen who purchased it, the factory workers who processed it, at each step, individuals participated in an atrocity by treating it as routine work. This pattern, the use of language and process to obscure the humanity of victims, appears in other atrocities throughout history. Recognizing these patterns is essential for preventing their recurrence. The Holocaust teaches us that dehumanization is a process, not a single event. It begins with words, with categories, with the gradual separation of certain groups from the protection of moral consideration. It ends in gas chambers and warehouses full of hair. Survivors and their descendants have spoken about what this exploitation means to them. For many, it represents the ultimate violation. Not only were their loved ones murdered, but their physical remains were stolen, processed, and turned into profit. The Nazi regime attempted to erase not only the lives of its victims, but their very existence as individuals. They tried to transform human beings into anonymous commodities. Our act of remembrance pushes back against this erasure. Some people ask why we continue to tell these stories. Why force ourselves and future generations to confront such darkness? Isn't it better to move on, to focus on the positive? The answer comes from the survivors themselves, many of whom dedicated the remainder of their lives to testimony. They understood that forgetting is its own form of erasure, that the victims deserve to be remembered not as statistics, not as raw materials, but as the human beings they were. Each strand in those bales belonged to someone. A mother who sang lullabies, a child who played in schoolyards, a teacher who nurtured young minds, a musician who filled homes with melody, a person with hopes, fears, joys, and sorrows, a life that mattered. The Jewish communities destroyed by the Holocaust had existed for centuries. They had developed rich cultural traditions, produced artists and scholars, built institutions and families. An entire world was annihilated. Remembrance is an act of resistance against that annihilation. When we tell these stories, when we preserve this history, when we teach new generations about what happened, we are refusing to let the Nazis have the final word. January 27th, the anniversary of Auschwitz's liberation, is now observed internationally as Holocaust Remembrance Day. On that date, each year, ceremonies take place around the world, ensuring that the memory persists. Memorial institutions like Yad Vashem in Israel, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, and countless others worldwide work tirelessly to preserve testimony, document the evidence, and educate the public. Researchers continue to identify individual victims, working to restore names and stories to those the Nazis tried to reduce to numbers. Each identification is a small victory against anonymity. The Holocaust was not inevitable. It was the result of choices made by individuals, by institutions, by societies. Understanding those choices is essential to preventing future atrocities. Genocide scholars have identified warning signs that precede mass atrocities. Classification of groups, symbolization through markers or labels, discrimination through laws and social exclusion, dehumanization through propaganda, organization of hate groups and militias, polarization of society. Recognizing these patterns early, before they escalate, offers the best hope for prevention. This is why Holocaust education matters, not as an exercise in guilt or despair, but as training in recognition and resistance. Even in the darkest times, some individuals made different choices. Righteous among the nations, as Israel designates them, risked their lives to save Jews from persecution. Their example proves that moral agency persists even under totalitarianism. Today, we face our own challenges. Anti-Semitism persists. Hatred of various groups finds expression in violence. Authoritarian movements use familiar tactics of dehumanization. The lessons of the Holocaust remain urgently relevant. Behind the glass at Auschwitz, that faded hair remains. A physical reminder of individual human beings, a silent testimony to industrial-scale murder, and a challenge to each of us. What will we do with this knowledge? Will we remain bystanders, or will we stand up when we see the first signs of dehumanization? The victims cannot speak for themselves anymore. Their memory calls us to speak for them. The Nazi regime tried to reduce human beings to commodities. They robbed lives. They robbed bodies. They robbed dignity. But they could not rob memory. Not as long as we refuse to forget. In memory of the 6 million Jews and millions of others murdered during the Holocaust. May their memory be a blessing.